Well, we come tonight to Numbers 25, and you wouldn't know this is a continuation of the Balaam story until actually chapter 31, when Moses tells us it was Balaam that counseled Balak to manipulate Israel with this idolatrous sin so God would punish them. And that's good as he's going to get. And so evidently, probably he got a compensation prize. He got some wealth, but not the kind of wealth he wanted if he could have cursed them. But remember, he kept trying and trying. And every time, those first 4 times, Balaam blessed them rather than cursing them. And then he had 3 more prophecies after that, a total of 7 prophecies. But we know as we look in the Bible, it tells us in 2 Peter about the way of Balaam. In Jude, it tells us about the error of Balaam. And tonight, we're looking at the story that we discover Jesus talks about in Revelation 2, called the doctrine or the teaching of Balaam. And so we come here to the first 3 verses. Now Israel remained in the acacia grove, and the people began to commit harlotry with the women of Moab. They invited the people of the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. And Israel was joined to Baal of Peor, and the anger of the Lord aroused against Israel. Now, what confuses people a little bit about this story, when we go back to chapter 22, it talks about Balak and the Midianite and the Moabites. And then he sends the Midianite and the Moabite princes to talk to him, and it doesn't do any good. So then he just sends back the second time the greater princes of Moab. And it does give us some wordage in chapter 22 of saying this is the way it was at this time. So at this particular time, it seems like Balak is the king of Moab, but in some way or form, whether battle or marriage or whatever, he was also over the Midianites, who were a traveling people. They weren't the people with a set location. They were Bedouins. And so sometimes he sends the Moab, sometimes he sends the Midians, and we're going to even see in this story that he sends down the Moabite women, but then later on we see the Midianite women there as well. And so this is why, again, some people will tell the story about the Moabite women, and another person will tell the same story about the Midianite women. You're going, who's got it wrong? Nobody. It was both. They just don't, in the Eastern mindset, it just wasn't that important to explain it in its entirety. This acacia grove, it's in an area of Abela. Josephus identified it as the Abela of his day. It was 7 miles east of the Jordan and about 5 miles north of the Dead Sea. Later, the Romans would build a Decapolis there, as you see on the map. So it is north of the Dead Sea, and then it is east of the River Jordan. And this is also called the Plains of Moab, and it's right across from Jericho, which would be their first battle, right? Which we won't get to for a very long time, till the book of Joshua. So we still got the rest of Numbers and Deuteronomy, but they're going to be in this valley the remainder time that we're in Numbers and we're in Deuteronomy. This is where they are staying for quite some time. This god of Baal or Baal is their fertility god, their most known god. But you got to understand, the gods at this time were locked into a locale. And so, remember later on, they said Jesus is possessed by Beelzebub, who was the god of that northern region of Galilee region of Israel. And so this particular god is similar to a number of the other gods, the Asherahs and stuff we'll see. Later on, you're going, well, they look like the same thing, or they sound like the same thing. Well, yeah, they basically are the same, worshipped in the same way, even have similar looks and likes and dislikes, but usually they're over that certain locale. So this was the Moabite, Canaanite god that also would be all over Israel. And the word joined, where it says they joined them, it's the word yoked. They partnered. They basically made them join the religion, if you would. I'd like to have sex with you. Let me give you a little taste of what you'd be getting. Wow, open the, whatever it was. I don't know how they did it. And it's just got to have a little meal with me. And in the midst of that, you pledge allegiance to my God. And then we can have sex. And so remember, in one of the curses, when Balaam wasn't successful, in Numbers 22:41, it says that Balak took Balaam to the high place of Baal Peor, to overlook the people. And what did they see as they overlooked the people? They saw the shape of a cross. That's important when we get into chapter 26 tonight. So the tragic pattern of Israel is this is going to be a continual theme. Pretty much the entire history of Israel is them going in and out with these different Canaanite gods, committing all kinds of worship and usually some kind of sexual aspect with that. But the worst of the worst was the wisest man that's ever lived, Solomon. It reminds me of a story of that hitchhiker, he had his backpack and he's wandering across, and the guy said, hey, I'll pick you up, and not only that, I'm getting ready to get on my plane and we're going to fly. If you want to go with us, you can hitchhike on my plane. And the guy said, yeah, sure, I'd love that. And they get up going, and there's a few guys on the plane, and all of a sudden the captain came back and said, I got bad news. All the engines have stopped and we're going to crash. And I only thought there was going to be 4 passengers. There's 5, so there's only 4 parachutes. And the one guy gets up and he said, I'm the smartest man in the world. I have to have a parachute. I must live. And he grabs it and he jumps out the plane. And the other 3 guys are starting to explain why they also should go. And the backpacker said, don't worry about it. The smartest man in the world just took my backpack. You got a variety of those jokes, right? Well, the smartest man in the world here did one of the most cliche, stupidest things that even a moron wouldn't have done. But Jesus said the rich get into heaven. It's like getting a camel through the eye of a needle. And Solomon in his own proverb says, God, don't let me be so rich that I say, I don't need you. And that's exactly what happened. And you guys know the story, right? In 1 Kings 11, verses 1 through 10, but King Solomon loved many foreign women, as well as the daughter of Pharaoh, the woman of the Moabites, the Amorites, the Edomites, the Sidonians, the Hittites, and the nations of whom the Lord said to the children of Israel, you shall never intermarry with them, nor they with you. Surely they will turn away your hearts after their gods. I mean, this wasn't speculation here, was it? This is the way it started, right before they even got into the promised land. But Solomon clung to these in love. He's this old guy and he's got these young hot wives and wants to please them. So he clung to them in love. And he had 700 wives, a little compulsive there, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. Sure enough. Verse 4, as it was so when Solomon was old, that his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not loyal to the Lord his God, as was the heart of his father David. For Solomon went after the Asheress, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Milcom, and the abomination of the Amorites. Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not fully follow the Lord, as did his father David. Verse 7, then Solomon built a high place for the Shirmash, the abomination of Moab, on the hill that is the east of Jerusalem. You know what we call that now? The Mount of Olives. That's a sacred hill where the Lord, when he returns, is going to land. So we're talking pristine location here. And for Moloch, the abominations of the people of Ammon. And he did likewise with all the foreign wives who burned incense and sacrificed to their gods. Had hundreds of wives and hundreds of temples all over the landscape of Jerusalem. So the Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice, and had commanded him concerning the thing that he should not go after their gods, but he did not keep what the Lord had commanded. A sad, sad story. Well, we learn in Numbers 31, verse 16, look, these women caused the children of Israel, Moses says, through the counsel, the doctrine, the teaching of Balaam, to trespass against the Lord in the incident of Peor. And this was a plague among the congregation of the Lord. Now you say, well, Bryan, can we move on to something that's a little more applicable to us in the New Testament? We're not like those guys thousands of years ago out in the western of Moab who worship pagan idols. We're not like a big, fat, content, wise, rich king. We're just regular old Christians in these last days. What's a story that you can make applicable to me? Well, Jesus said it's this very doctrine, this very counsel that we got to watch out for as last days believers. In Revelation 2:12, starting there, and to the angel of the church in Pergamos write, these things says he who has the sharp two-edged sword. I know your works, where you dwell, where Satan's throne is, Bel Peor. And you hold fast to my name and did not deny my faith, even the days which Antipas was my faithful martyr, who was killed among you where Satan dwells. Sounds similar. How would you describe California? Right there. Revelation, verse 12 and 13. But I have a few things against you, because you have there those who hold the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balaam to put a stumbling block before the children of Israel, to eat things sacrificed to idols, and to commit sexual immorality. Thus you also have those who hold the doctrine of the Nicolaitans. I think this is basically describing the Catholic Church, okay, what would become the Catholic Church, what we know of today, a hierarchy of religion. Jesus wasn't on the cross going, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. I just can't wait to see that grand poobah hat on the Pope, and boy, I hope they do a great job at that Sistine Chapel. I don't think that's why Christ died, to see a Catholic Church. I mean, there couldn't be, Jesus would not fit in the Catholic Church. And anyway, this is what they were doing, creating this hierarchy, which he says is similar to the doctrine of Balaam. It's that idolatrous in the face of Christ. So which thing I hate? Repent, or else I will come to you quickly and will fight against them with the sword of my mouth. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To him who overcomes, I will give some of the hidden manna to eat, and I will give him a white stone, and on the stone a new name written, which no one knows except him who receives it. So Jesus is saying, man, this church of Pergamos, you guys are tough dudes. Even when right there, they were killing the Christians right in front of you, and you guys didn't back down. You stood your ground. They didn't kill you, just one of you, Antipas, but you didn't back down. And it was as hot a spiritual attack as you can get. It wasn't half, it wasn't a quarter, it was full on where Satan dwells. You were getting hit every possible way in the front, but like Balaam told Balak a little sneaky way to get in the back door, so it's happened with the church in Pergamos. And you are bowing down to the gods of Satan, of the clergy hierarchy, the Nicolaitans, this gubernatorial church that rules like a machine, like a government. I hate this. And so repent. Not of the big sins of bowing, not bowing down in front of the Caesar in front of you, but bowing down to the voice behind you saying, join the governorship and we'll give you some money. Become a overseer of a group of churches and we'll make you, give you a gold necklace to wear and you'll have power. And he says in the same slippery way that Balaam seduced the children of Israel, the same way this doctrine, the seducing spirit of Satan is working in the church. And it's the same thing for money and power and prestige. Well, going back here, it tells us in those first 3 verses of chapter 25, the anger of the Lord was aroused against them. And we've covered this before. The word literally, the anger, is the reddening of the nose. That's literally what it says there in the Hebrew. Because the bull, right? It gets mad, it starts snorting and spitting, and its nose gets red as it charges. God is furious, like a bull snorting and sniffing and shaking its head and getting ready to gore you. This is the word that God uses. He's angry. Now it is interesting that Balaam went to all of this work to mess these guys up in the valley, which God said, they're my kids, I want to bless them. And he got his bags of gold, but guess what? He didn't get to use it very long. Because in chapter 31, we saw this last time, in verse 7 and 8, it tells us that he settled with the Midianites. So after they did this abominable deed, the ladies come back and they're all rejoicing how they got all these young virgin Israeli men to have sex with them and eat the food offered to idols and to bow down and worship their God so they could have sex. And they're the girls are like in the men's locker room in a very crude way. And Balaam is right there, a hero amongst them, with his big fat wallet full. But he died when the Midianites were attacked. They attacked Balaam along with him, and they killed him with the sword. And so he died like a pagan Midianite himself. So, the story of Balaam is, and the story of Solomon is, very similar in that God can use a man mightily, but he still has the power of free choice to what he's going to do with this great gift. Right? You reap what you sow. I mean, the Lord just made it very clear. In the physical universe, you reap what you sow. And in the spiritual realm, you reap what you sow. And so, even though these men had high heights, Balaam and Solomon, their ends were very similar in that they were groveling before pagans because of the beauty of a woman and the glorifying of sex, and knowing it was indirectly or directly worshiping Satan, but they went along with it because their flesh was the guide of their life. And if you listen to your flesh, Romans makes it pretty clear, you have death. Now, I don't think we die literally, but we have a separation from God. Your sins separate you from God. But when we walk in the Spirit, we have life and peace. So Solomon, with all his glory, the wisest man in the world, there in that beautiful cedar house that his dad had built, looking at the glorious temple that was one of the 7 wonders of the world that he administrated over with all his wisdom. All the kings of the world came to see him and left their riches. Yet he would be tasting the bitter sweetness of having wounded God so deeply with his idolatry. And Balaam, out of his own mouth, said how sweet it was. Oh, I get it. I taste it. I smell it. To die the death of a righteous man, he said. Whew, I get it. Why people want to die that way. Remember in one of his last prophecies? But he would not die, a righteous man. Well, in verse 4 and 5 now of Numbers 25, and the Lord said to Moses, take all the leaders of the people, and notice, hang the offenders before the Lord out in the sun, that the fierce anger of the Lord may turn away from Israel. So Moses said to the judges of Israel, every one of you kill his men who were joined to Baal Peor. Wow. God's anger says, tell the leaders to step up and lead. And they know who participated in this and who didn't. And every tribe's got to do the deed himself. Every leader has to have the bittersweetness of being a leader. You know, as being a leader, sometimes you're the hero and sometimes you're the zero. And you're the zero right now, but you've got to do it. And so to take those men, to get the ropes, to figure out some kind of system and put the rope around their neck and hang them and then just let their bodies dangle in the sun until I guess it just fell apart. They weren't going to be buried. We're going to learn more about this, that cursed is the man who hangs on the tree. And Galatians 3 says that's why Jesus was hanged on the cross, because he took the curse for us. And so these responsibility, they assembled the chief judges together. They instituted some kind of inquiry. They had some kind of court system. They had some kind of guilty plea, and it required an immediate justice. This is what we will always find within the civil laws. Now, I do not believe we can try to reduplicate the Old Testament law system as our civil government, okay? But our forefathers, they had a Bible in one hand, even those that weren't Christians, which most of them were. But they used the Bible as the guidelines because they said there is no societal system that is superior if you combine the Old and New Testament together in a Judeo-Christian ethic. And that's what our forefathers said. We are built upon a Judeo-Christian ethic. And this is why when they were going to pronounce a punishment or institute, they would go to the scripture. Our 3 branches of government comes out of Isaiah. There's some books on this. There's a great group. If you want to read some little pamphlets on this that are really great, go to a website called Wall Builders. The guy's name is David Barton. And the guy is just a genius. I just saw that Trump was having him work on something the other day. He was the one talking and giving all these slides and graphs and speaking. I'm like, hey, that's Dave Barton. He looks like an old man now. Last time I saw him, he was in his 30s. But anyway, guy's a genius. Anyway, he goes into all of this. But remember back in Exodus 32, after the golden calf story. And Moses says, mercy, mercy. And God said, okay, I'm not going to blot them out. I'm not going to punish them. for this. We'll just count the 3,000 that died that didn't come behind you on the Levites. We'll count that as a finished work. But, Moses, it won't work a second time. Okay? And he says there in Exodus 32:34, now therefore go, lead the people to the place of which I spoken to you. Behold, my angel shall go before you. Then he says this in Exodus 32:34, nevertheless, in the day when I visit for punishment, I will visit punishment upon them for their sin. So the next time around, there will not be an unpunished sin on the table. Each is going to get punished in their due course. And so the leaders were told to go take the men of their tribe that were responsible, that they could come up with the names and go through some kind of judicial system, and they all get together and you go through a procedure of them publicly being hanged, and their bodies are smelling and corroding and falling apart. Everybody's going to see the whole beginning, the middle, the end, the yuckiness of a dead corpse. Because this is the reality of what I am seeing in the spiritual realm. Just a note, when you have a society that does not name evil as evil and does not punish that wrong quickly and according to its merit, that society will implode and fall apart. We have seen that in history. Probably the latest was the Roman Empire, how it just sort of fell apart. But if you had a society, even if it's just a couple hundred people out in the middle of the jungles of New Guinea, if they have a murder, they have to put that person to death. If they don't have a death sentence for somebody who murdered, you will end up with more murders. Surprise. You have to have a punishment that fits the crime. If they say in the society, oh, we don't see stealing as a wrong, or adultery as a wrong, or murder or rape, or lying as a wrong, then the society will destroy itself. So they have to say, rape is wrong, and here's the penalty. And no, it's not surprising, as it is in the Old Testament we've been reading, most of the time it's a death penalty, something very, very severe. Of course, you wouldn't have that for lying or for stealing, but you'd have a punishment that fits the crime. And of course, in the Judeo ethic, it was if you get caught stealing, you have to pay 4 times the amount back, right? And that's what we saw with Zacchaeus. When Zacchaeus repented, he said, I'm going to go to the people that I know who I stole from and where they're at, and I'm going to give them 4 times the amount back. And Jesus says, today I've seen salvation has come to this house. He was willing to be equitable. He was willing to punish himself according to the crime, even though it wasn't a crime according to the Roman system, it was a crime before God in his system. Well, I could go more into that, but I won't. But let's get up down to verse 6 through 9. And indeed, one of the children of Israel came and presented his brethren a what? Midianite woman in the sight of Moses and in the sight of the congregation of the children of Israel, who were weeping at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. Now when Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, saw it, he rose from among the congregation, took a javelin in his hand. He went out after the man of Israel into the tent and thrust both them through. And the man of Israel and the woman through her body. So the plague was stopped among the children of Israel. And those who died in the plague were 24,000. So in the meantime, it didn't tell us until at the end of this little episode, but a plague had broken out. On top of the people that had been hanging, that had gone through some kind of trial system, the plague broke out on all of Israel because it was also a national sin. And therefore, the nation was being punished by what the heads of some of the tribes and the families had done. But Eleazar, he sees this guy, and we're going to read a little more on it in a minute. Who they are makes a difference. But he basically brings them out to the tabernacle. Can you believe this? A Midianite woman from the outer courts. He brings her in. There's the altar of incense. There's the laver of water. Here the people are crowded inside that small tabernacle area on their knees, crying and praying, and many of their loved ones they just saw hanging outside on a pole somewhere there, and their bodies are corroding, and there's this deep sense of shame and sorrow over their sin. And this guy comes walking in like two newlyweds, two lovers, and going, "Hey, this may not be the best time." You guys used to see the Gary Lawson comics? That guy was hilarious. And there was one where this deer had this giant birthmark on its side, and it was a bullseye. And these other two deers are talking, going, "Man, that is a horrible birthmark to have." For a deer, it's a big target on the side of a deer. Anyway, these guys, it's like this. This guy is just so unaware of the heart of God. He's so unaware of the sin and of the depths of the sin. He's unaware that people have a plague on them, unaware that people's loved ones are hanging outside having sinned. And he brings this gal into the tabernacle area. Now, if we go back, we remember that the priest, one of their jobs was to guard the tabernacle area. They were the door security. If you're bringing in a lamb, they inspect it. Is it past muster before you can offer it? They're looking at who you are coming in, whether you're able to come into the outer court or able to come into the inner court. They were guarding the place. And so if you would, Phinehas, who is the son of Eleazar, who himself would be the future next high priest, would he not? It was his job. And his job was to get them out of there now. But what possessed him was the same anger of God. When we think about David, a man after God's own heart, he did all his will. We can speculate, what was that thing? Was it his heart of tenderness to the Holy Spirit, his heart of worship, his love for God? There's so many things about David that we can't say, but here it was bing, 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 bing. Phinehas' heart was matched with God's heart on the hatred of sin. Lord, help us to hate what you hate to the degree you hate it. And Lord, help us to love what you love to the degree you love it. Now, this guy, Eleazar, we're now seeing him as a player, a connector. Back in Exodus chapter 6, that was a long time ago. That was like a decade ago, wasn't it? No, not that long ago. But back in Exodus 6, verse 25, it tells us that Eleazar, Aaron's son, we just saw him a couple chapters back. Remember, he took the clothes off his dad and put the clothes on himself, and him and Moses came walking down the hill when Aaron was gathered to his people. Well, he took for himself one of the daughters of Putiel as wife, and she bore him Phinehas. These are the heads of the fathers' houses of the Levites according to their families. So Phinehas was the head. And we see again in the genealogy of who this man of action was. And so in the sight of all the congregation, in the tabernacle area, such gall, he now grabs up the javelin. I don't know whose it was, but it was necessary because he needed it to secure the holy place. That was his job. Imagine if they sat there having a conversation with that guy. Hey, this isn't a good time to have this conversation. She probably, I don't want to be mean. She probably shouldn't be in here. Would you? Oh man, imagine. But think about this. One man's act against the hatred of sin stopped the plague on everyone. How did it happen? Through the piercing. This is a picture of Jesus. He pierces them through, and the plague stops. Just like through Jesus, he said, if I be lifted up, all men will be drawn unto me. Through Christ, the one sacrifice perfects forever through his healing. Boy, the Bible tells us to be angry. Matter of fact, the Bible makes it clear, if you're not angry, especially about sin, then that is sin in and of itself. Jesus was angry when the Pharisees were testing him whether he would heal the person on the Sabbath day. Do you remember that? And there in Mark 3, he looked around and it said with anger. And he was grieved. And he told the person with the withered hand, stretch out your hand. And they were healed. And boy, the Pharisees came unglued, didn't they? Of course, Jesus cleansing the temple. We know about that. Turning over tables and money changers and animals flying. But through the piercing, atonement, if you would, was stopped. And 24,000 people in total died. Now, some try to make a point. Well, here's a mistake in the Bible. In 1 Corinthians 10, remember where Paul says these things were as an example for us? And he gives several of the stories out of Numbers. Remember this in 1 Corinthians 10? When it comes to this story, he says, nor let us commit sexual immorality as some of them did, and in one day 23,000 fell. Hold it. I go back and it says 24,000 killed. Well, it says fell here. 23,000 fell under the plague. But I think there's another 1,000 that died from the hanging. That would be why the numbers are different. There was a total of 24,000 that were hanged and died of the plague. But 23 fell from the plague, 23,000 of them. Well, verse 10 through 13. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, has turned back my wrath from the children of Israel, because he was zealous with my zeal among them, so that I did not consume the children of Israel in my zeal. Therefore say, behold, I give to him my covenant of peace. It shall be to him and his descendants after him as a covenant of an everlasting priesthood, because he was zealous for his God and made atonement for the children of Israel. There's a special covenant, and really the meaning of it, we don't know, but it's something that we'll see in heaven. A special crown or a special golden crest or something on their garments for him and his lineage. Through the one act of the one man, the whole lineage, his kids and grandkids and great-kids, would be specially honored forever because of this moment in time where he had an anger for sin, anger for this paganism, this idolatry, this sexuality, the whole sin of it. He matched God's heart on it, and he acted on it, and he pierced it through and killed them both. Now here's a little footnote to this story in verse 14 to 18. Now the name of the Israelite who was killed with the Midianite woman was Zimri, the son of Salu, the leader of his father's house among the Simonites, Simonites. And the name of the Midianite woman who was killed was Cosbi, the daughter of Zur. He was the head of the people of the father's house in Midian. So we have a prince and a princess, equally wealthy, equally high standing, and most believe that she was a priestess. It's interesting that in the pagan religions, you had more of the leaders of those pagan religions as the priestess, more than you had the priest. But in Israel, you had no priestess, only priest. Interesting thought on the nature of God versus the nature of lies and evil. Zimri, his name actually means my remembrance. Cosby's name actually means lie or deception. She was sort of a prototype of later on a Jezebel. You guys remember about Jezebel later in the Kings? That wicked Ahab and Jezebel. Well, God makes it clear, harass the Midianites, he says. Verse 16 now to verse 18. And the Lord spoke to Moses saying, harass the Midianites and attack them. For they harassed you with their schemes by which they seduced you in the matter of Peor and in the matter of Cosbi, the daughter of the leader of the Midian, their sister, who was killed in the day of the plague because of the Peor. This was personal, and I want you to make it personal. From now on, you have a standing decree from God whenever you see the Midianites attack. Small bands, big bands, in the city, in the country, from now on, you are to attack. Later on, we'll discover in Numbers 31, he tells them that 12,000 Israelites attacked the Midianites. They destroyed all their cities, slew their 5 kings, every male, every grown-up woman, and took all their spoils. So in chapter 31, they're going to get a chance to really take it out on them. Well, chapter 26, let's hurry and do that. There's only 65 verses. We really can do it because it's a census, the second census. Now, let me start in verse 1 through 4 there. It came to pass after the plague that the Lord spoke to Moses and Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, saying, take a census of all the congregation of the children of Israel from 20 years old and above by their fathers' houses, all who are able to go to war to Israel. Remember, does this sound familiar? Remember back earlier in Numbers, same thing happened in the first census. So Moses and Eleazar, not Aaron this time, he's gone, but Eleazar, the priest, spoke with them in the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho, saying, take a census of the people from 20 years old and above, just as the Lord commanded Moses and the children of Israel who came out of the land of Egypt. So he does this. Now, I would like you to skip down to verse 33, because next chapter we have a story about this. You got this guy, Zelophehad, of the Manasseh tribe of the people. He had no sons, but he had 4 daughters, Mahlah, Noah, Holga, Milcah, and Tezrah. And this is going to make a difficult situation. Well, we number the people. Now, if you'll notice here, I've given you a chart of comparison between the first census, earlier in Numbers, and now the second census and the change. So Reuben in the first census had 46,500, but now they are down almost 3,000. They're now down to 43,730, a minus 2,770, a drop of 6%. Simon was 59,300 in the first census. Now he's down quite a bit to 22,200. That is a negative 37,100. So that's interesting because we just saw that the leader of Simeon was the one who tried to marry the priestess. So this is a compromising group. And they reduced by a negative 63%. Gad was 45,650. They reduced down to 40,500, 5,150 less people. That's 11%. Then you got Judah. They were 74,600 in the first census. They dropped down to, or they went up to 76,500. They grew by 1,900, a plus 3%. Issachar, 54,400. Second census, 64,300. They added 9,900, a plus 18%. Zebulun was 57,400. He went up to 60,500. That's an addition of 3,100, a plus 5%. Manasseh, 32,200. He went up to 52,700. That's a plus 20,500, a 64% increase. And Ephraim was 40,500. Went down to 32,500. Lost 8,000 people, a 20%. Now later on, we will discover that Ephraim becomes the largest and stays the largest tribe throughout. Benjamin is 35,400. They go up to 45,600, but the time you get to the end of the book of Judges, they're gone. Everything gets wiped out in Benjamin, but they, at this point, had a plus 10,200, a plus 29%. Dan was 62,700. They went up 64,400 to 1,700. Surplus, they grew to plus 3%. Asher, 41,500, went up to 53,400, a plus 11,900, and plus 29%. Naphtali, 53,400. Went down to 45,400, a minus 8,000. That is a 15%. And again, with the Levites, we don't count them. A total in the first census was 603,550. It went down to 601,730, a minus 1,860 men who are ready to go to war. A negative 0.3%, basically almost exactly the same amount of people after the whole first generation died out. And most believe this story here in chapter 25 that we just finished was the final group of whoever was left over from before died. So that was sort of the finishing touch on the generation before that died within the plague. Now you say, why? Okay, you have all these thousands of people die, and we're getting ready to go into the promised land. We need to find out how many soldiers we have here, men of 20 years old and above, who are able to fight in battle. Why couldn't you just said, hey, it came out about the same in the story? Because, guys, this is the group of people, for the most part, minus 24,000, that Balaam was looking down on. And had that number quadrupled, either way, what would have Balaam been looking down on? Maybe a swastika or a plus sign or a big stick. But we know here from the numbers, even after the loss of that entire first generation, guess what they still come into the shape of? The cross. Isn't that amazing? Now, why was it so important to be prosperous during this 38 years of deadness in the wilderness? We find out in verse 52 to 56. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, to these the land shall be divided as an inheritance according to the number of the names. The large tribe you shall give the large inheritance, the small tribe you shall give the small inheritance. Each shall be given and its inheritance according to those who are numbered by them. But the land shall be divided by lot. Remember, Proverbs says, God's in the lot. So they would pull it out out of a hat, to figure out who gets their first choice. They shall inherit according to the names of the tribes of the fathers. According to their lot, their inheritance shall be divided between the larger and the smaller. So those who made it through the 38 years of desert hardship, they would now have a bigger piece of the promised land. And those who said, man, there's just out here in the desert, doesn't really matter. We're just biding time until we get to the promised land. Well, now they get to the promised land, they're going to have a much smaller group. And somehow the lot played into that the larger group had the first choice of what land they would get. And then we look in verse 57 to 62, it tells us about the Levites, which we already know. They had three groups, the Gershonites, the Kohathites, and the Merarites. And we see that they're still intact. Now, you say, why is this important? Because there's been some pretty hard things that happened to them. Remember back in chapter 16, the Kohathites led a rebellion, and a lot of the top guys, the nephews of Aaron and Moses, were swallowed up or fried as they put incense into the incense altar there, and they were fried by God. But then he mentions again that that Aaron had four sons, Nadab, Abihu, who again died on the very first day of the tabernacle back in Leviticus 10. And then he has Eleazar and Ithamar, which are alive now. Now, those were the numbers of the 23,000, every male from the month old and above, for they were not numbered among the children of Israel because there was no inheritance for them in the children of Israel. So although there was a total of 23,000 of them, they're not counted in as part of the census because they would be spread and sprinkled out throughout the land in the 7 cities of refuge that we'll get into later. Verse 63. These are those who were numbered by Moses and Eleazar the priest, who numbered the children of Israel in the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho, verse 64 and 65. But among these there is not a man of those who were numbered by Moses and Aaron the priests, where they're numbered the children of Israel in the wilderness of Sinai. So Moses noticed as he counted them out, he had never counted this group before. All the men 20 years old and above that were capable for battle were not familiar people. All the people they counted before had all died. Verse 65, for the Lord had said to them, they shall surely die in the wilderness, so there was not left a man of them except Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Joshua the son of Nun. Well,